Welcome to Eternal Paradigm. Together, we're uncovering the human experience and exploring physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual stories with me, your host, Amy Ravel. Hello, welcome to this episode of Eternal Paradigm. I hope you're enjoying your journey to find you. In this episode, I had a conversation with a transformation coach, incredibly results driven. And it was incredibly interesting, actually. You will hear what we talked about. But my reason for having this conversation with my guest, whose name is Benson Fox, was because he just intrigued me. I just thought there is just so much there. Now, for those of you who know or don't know, for years, and I am still incredibly fascinated and try to be involved where I can be in interfaith dialogue. I know, again, for some of you who have been listening, where I talk very much about conditioning and social conditioning and different types of conditioning, that for me to be involved or interested in interfaith dialogue seems quite, some might say contradictory, but there you go. Everyone has their thing, right? And so having this conversation with Coach Fox was actually a lot of fun because I got to ask him questions that if you're in a coaching kind of setup, you don't really get to ask your coach certain questions. I mean, you can, but they will always bring it back to you. Because that's how coaching works. And the reason I really, really wanted to talk to Coach Fox, I call him Coach Fox, his name is Benson, but it's because he's one of 8 siblings. He has a bachelor's of Talmudic studies, Talmudic law even, and he studied happiness from religious perspectives for years. And that fascinates me. I'm also one of those people who isn't, I understand happiness and joy as concepts, but I am not hugely wowed by people who believe that there has to be a positive shift on everything because, yes, it's helpful in some ways, but not totally. But I'm sure we'll come back to that at some point. So I managed to ask him all of these questions like, what is it like being one of 8 children? Where are you in the order? And how much did that actually teach you about you when you're coaching clients? And, what sorts of discoveries did you make? And also things like what's interesting in terms of reading, because I am a huge fan of Johann Hari, who, if anybody hasn't heard of him, he is a journalist and an author who has written and spoken about mental health, depression, about connection. And he also looked at using pharmaceuticals for treating depression. So in the conversation that comes up too, I also ask about what he learned when he studied everything that he studied. What also comes up though, like I said, is when you're having these conversations, when it comes to interfaith especially, and understanding people not only from their faith perspectives, but to actually allow for there to be differing perspectives on the table without getting offended or affected by it, because I personally don't feel that serves my purpose. So there is a bit in the conversation where the fact that, faith background does come into question, mine, and also different perspectives on that. And you know what? Like I said, that's cool. That's the good thing about having these cool conversations. But definitely keep listening. And this was one of those conversations that was interesting. It was really fascinating to learn and to hear and understand, what type of life experience actually goes to shape a coach. So I will leave this with you and introduce my guest.
Hi, Army. My name is Benson Fox. I am a transformation life coach, which means that I kind of work backwards. And in terms of I define the result for my client, and then we work backwards to come up with a system to get them to that result. Aside from that, I have a major in psychology. I have certifications as both a transformation coach and crisis counselor. And I'm currently in a school psychology doctoral program in my 2nd year at Adelphi University, as well as a psychology extern, which means I'm doing therapy, but I don't have a degree yet, but I have supervision currently at Brooklyn College Personal Counseling Center.
Wow, that's incredibly transformation focused from every aspect. Cool beans, thank you. So initially in the actual form, you said that you are one of 8 children. I am really intrigued to know more about, growing up as one of 8, what your place was in the order, and also how much that has helped you in terms of where you are at now in life, professionally, personally, and so forth. If you're willing to divulge, that would be great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I'm one of 8, 4 boys, 4 girls in our family. Boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, boy, girl, girl. So I'm number 6. I'm number 6 out of the 8. I think it's interesting. There's many theories about how people are affected. I would say personally, many of my older siblings were role models for me. And whether that was good or not good for some, that can be debated. There's always going to be pros and cons to every role model. So I think that definitely played a role. I also think the order affects in terms of the parenting style. I think that my parents over time became less strict, I would say, as time progressed. So I think that plays a role as well, but also less involved, I would say. So I think that's a pretty common experience for parents that they, their first child, they're trying out everything on them. And then as time goes on, they just kind of like go into a routine and not make as big a deal about things, but also maybe just like stand back. So how did that impact me? I think interesting. So in some ways, I have the benefit of having not the most, my 2 younger sisters, but having the most role models, having the most people in my life that can help guide me and support me. On the other hand, I would have loved to have a younger brother, I have to say. But I think I was impacted that I had more guidance, more support. And yeah, I think that helped me. And I think I was affected by the parenting style as well. But that's from in both ways. So that's my answer.
That's cool. So did you find where you said, your older siblings were like role models, because I'm the eldest of 3 and there's a fair bit of pressure. Did you find that your older siblings were not only role models, but where your parents had become kind of different in their parenting style, that your older siblings potentially sometimes stepped in as parent figures?
Yes, that definitely happened. There is also an element, though, one other way I got impacted, I would say, is that there is an element of comparison from others. And that's not helpful. And that's not helpful whenever people make comparisons between us, because we're from the same family and we may have similar physique because we came from the same people. We're very different people. And I think people have their little folders in their brain of where people belong. And it's like, oh, it's a fox, because my name is Benson Fox. So I think people in their mind, they just put us together. And I think that wasn't helpful, because then it puts a pressure on me to live up to other people's strengths, other people's my siblings' strengths and abilities in ways that, or in ways that are like cookie cutter, that don't necessarily fit with my unique personality, strengths, etc. So that's a way that I was affected, I think, by being further down the chain. People are more likely to make those comparisons and put that type of pressure.
Yes, that does make sense. And comparisons are always difficult to deal with at the best of times. So just moving on, you have studied a range of different things, and I'm really interested in understanding your studies and learning in happiness so it's very specific in terms of how you're exploring happiness and where you're looking at it from. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes. So my perspective is formed from 3 places: from the coaching world, from the psychology world, psychologists, more that therapy world, and then from Judaism. And I have a bachelor's in Talmudic law, and I have the certifications as a life coach, crisis counselor, and then I'm currently in a psychology doctoral program. So I kind of fuse them together to get a sense. I think they emphasize different aspects that contribute to happiness. So I think, let's say the coaching world, they will encourage things that will, I would say, more daily habits and action item. So it would be like a morning routine, a night routine, a structure, a writing down your goals and living a life trying to be purposeful, living a life of purpose and meaning, socialize, become part of a community, take care of your body, through what your inputs and outputs are. So that's going to be very much the focus of more of the coaching world. And I think that that's valuable. I think from Judaism, there's going to be a lot of that as well. Well, in addition to a focus on gratitude, appreciating, understanding that we're owed nothing, and our ability to talk, our bodies, our souls, everything, our identities were given to us. So there is absolutely nothing that is taken for granted. Judaism also focuses on the relationship with God. And this is a big piece that people are afraid to talk about. And I am too, but I will talk about it anyway. I'll take the ramifications of that, which is imagine you had someone in your life that knew you, understood you to your core. And not only that, but was actually orchestrating your entire life to make you succeed. Your trust fund and everything. Every single thing that they did was done for your benefit. They love you to pieces more than anyone else in your life and more than any way that you can imagine them to. And imagine that they're running they have full control of every aspect of your life, and they are orchestrating every part of your life for not only your immediate good, but also your ultimate good as well, keeping both in mind. And imagine you could talk to them whenever you want, and they have power to control anything at all. And that a religious person, that is the possibility. If that becomes real to you, that is a huge source of happiness and resilience, and produces a level of meaning and a sense of protection and control and order to the world and to your life and to everything that no one that can't be replaced. That there's, so that adds so much, infuses so much of a resilience and a protection for mental health. And it's such a happiness, because then you could let go in terms of trying to control everything, because you know that the one that is in control is someone that is fully invested and fully capable of making your life work out the way it's supposed to. So that's coming from a Jewish angle. From a psychology aspect, and I think that's a major contribution. I would say appreciation and the relationship with God. I would say also studying Torah, so it's some level of intellectual stimulation, but it's also the aspect, it's another form of connecting to God. There are many different ways that we talk to God, that we listen to what God's saying through the oral and written tradition. Finally, I would say from a psychology perspective, so I think all these contribute in major ways. I would say one more thing about Judaism is the fact how we try to meet the mind, body, and soul's needs. So the soul's needs is, again, primarily through connecting to God, but studying, it's through words, singing. There are many ways that Judaism has the fulfilling commandments that we could connect to God in that way. And then finally, through a psychology prism, I believe that we have countless parts to ourselves, and all our parts are good and wonderful in the right dose and context. And creating an internal harmony, not to be at war with yourself and believing that you have to leave any part of yourself behind, but creating a relationship with every part of yourself where they all have a seat at the table and are accepted, respected, and integrated, where you're the CEO and you make sure they're all heard. And even if you don't listen to their direct advice in a given scenario, you still try to integrate their underlying values and priorities and what they're advocating for. And I think that's really what greatness, that's what success, that's what healing will look like, is when you take that traumatized part of yourself that feels helpless and powerless, instead of shutting it down and saying, oh, I'm not like that, and you let it have a seat at the table as well and bring it back to the surface. That's what healing will look like, this internal harmony, this relationship where every part of yourself has a seat at the table and is allowed to talk and you listen. So I think that's how all three of those perspectives all together really contribute to a person's sense of joy in their lives. And that would be more of like a holistic approach towards it.
I can totally understand. And so from your perspective, the three approaches are kind of intertwined for you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And when you're working with clients, you're able to transfer the skills from one to the other. And so what actual benefits have you seen in the clients that you're working with that have really helped you feel like bringing these three valuable kind of facets together has really kind of, you've been able to bring that out in another person. You've been able to share it, and then you've seen, your clients basically benefit from it. Yeah. So how have your clients effectively benefited from it? What tangible changes have you been able to see, feel, and experience, or for them to see, feel, and experience? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. You're like asking how, what produces, I guess, the confidence in my approach. And that should be based off of the evidence, the data of what the results I was able to get for them. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say, don't take my word for it. I would say, go check out my page at coachbensonfox.com and go to the testimonial section, where you'll see letters of recommendation. You'll see written testimonials as well as video ones as well. But just in terms of I think it's an important question. I'll tell you, I started out more from just from the psychology perspective. And I saw the coaching world as a more of a superficial way to create happiness. And then I came to understand that there is also a room for healing. Healing, I think psychology is going to produce the deepest, not the deepest compared to the Judaism, but deeper compared to the more behavioral coaching approach, focusing on doing things, accomplish, empower, that type of mentality. I realized that there's two parallel tracks that it's useful to balance as a person's going through our journeys in our lives. And that is balancing functionality with healing. And I do think that there's a certain short-term happiness or basic level of coping and just getting through and getting fulfilling one's daily responsibilities. And that's really where I think the coaching perspective, that's really what I think it helps fill in. Taking the cold shower and all these things. It's not a long-term way of dealing with things, but it is a good way, I think, of trying to get through our day-to-day. And I would say the Judaism approach and the psychology approach, those will provide more of the deeper healing, I think, for my clients. And that's really where my focus is more primarily. Although there will be times where if I see that they have to be ready for that. There has to be a certain level of healing that has already taken place, a certain level of functionality in order to go through this process of the deeper building a relationship with God. That's a daunting task. Bringing parts to yourself where you felt so helpless and broken and hopeless, bringing those to the surface when you felt so overwhelmed by those parts, bringing them back to the surface, that's a scary proposition. So you need to be ready for that. I mean, you're never going to be ready, but you need to be a certain minimum threshold of objective readiness in order to embark on that courageous voyage. So that's where I see the coaching coming in, is kind of like sometimes it could be a necessary first step. And I think the coaching thing will end up being the result of someone who lives a life in sync with these things. I think it'll happen naturally, but sometimes manually it needs to kind of be enforced in order to build up the level of, I guess, ability or competency, or it's really mental space to allow for the space for healing and relationships building and resolution and processing work that needs to be done. I hope did that answer your question?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because one of my questions here is coaching a spiritual practice, or does it have a spiritual component in any sense? And what I gather from what you're saying is there are almost like several factors at play here. I think for you, where you're talking about Judaism, and for me, my upbringing has been rooted in Hinduism. So there are significant spiritual learning for me that's already taken place. And then from that point onwards, it's bringing everything together. So yeah, that does make sense. Cool. And another question, just off the cuff. Have you read Johann Hari's Lost Connections?
I have not, but I am familiar with a lot of his videos. The real cause of depression,
Yeah. What's your take on a lot of the stuff that he's been uncovering and looking at, especially through the videos, because they're everywhere, and he's made all of his interviews available for everyone to listen to. So have you seen any of his videos, and do you have a take on any of them, really?
I have a take on everything.
Do share.
Yeah, for sure, I will. So yeah, I did watch some of his videos. I'll tell you what I like about what he's saying, because I think there is a problem that one of our valuable defenses, and I think our defenses are useful, and I'm not trying to dismiss or demonize our defenses, but one of our defenses that we'll use is trying to find ways that we're not in control of our lives, and there's nothing we could do about it. And we try to kind of convince ourselves at our own sense of helplessness, or try to make the solution where we don't need to face the parts of ourselves that every one of us has a part of ourselves that we're very afraid to face and are very afraid to address. And I think that's really what a great person will do. A person of true greatness will be able to really internalize and bring to the table every part of themselves and develop that relationship with God. And I think God is one of those parts of ourselves. So I think what I like about what he says is that I believe there's this movement currently in the psychology world, and it takes different forms. But I think like neurology, like this new movement, how everything's a gene and we all have our predispositions, and that there's a suicide gene and the depression gene and everything. It's this deterministic meaning like everything's already predetermined, and we're just a bunch of cells and whatever bouncing off with countless factors, and whatever is going to happen. And our sense of control and agency is an illusion. Because that itself is one of the things that it's just a series of measuring the pros and cons, which is already part of our built-in algorithm. So from a religious perspective, I fiercely, on the most deep level, disagree with something like this. And I think it's a defense. And I think it makes it very easy, because if I tell you that your problem has nothing to do with you or your environment or anything, that means you don't need to face any part of yourself that you don't want to face. You don't need to go to where your pain and discomfort is. And the point isn't to experience the pain and discomfort. The point is to receive the communications of what the pain and discomfort are telling you and to integrate those parts of yourselves. So I think that what I like about his approach is that he's became very popular, and he speaks out openly how the biology plays, if it plays a role at all, it plays a very small role. And the solution to a person's psychology problems, extraordinarily rarely will the healing be because of a medication, although there will be times where medication could be necessary. It's not the solution. It's a way of managing symptoms in the short term, that when a person is going through extreme periods. But overall, it's something that I'm very hesitant to push my clients in that direction, unless I was in fear of their life or someone else's. So I do like how he tries to push us away from that type of modality and more towards things that are within our internal locus of control.
Yeah, definitely. I fully connect with a lot of what he's saying. So another question, well, two questions really. One is, what is the definition of happiness from a religious perspective, a psychological perspective, and from a coaching perspective? Have you determined a definition, or is there an outward definition?
Happiness is an experience, and any experience, we're always going to be struggling from our words, because our words are always going to be limited, and our experiences are an experience, especially that of happiness, is expansive. So I will struggle, but the best I could do, which is pretty good, is I would say it's an internal and external harmony with oneself and the world and God. I would say that would be the best definition. And what's included in that, and so I want to make it clear, is that there needs to be a balancing of the mind, body, and soul's needs. And one of the soul's needs is going to need to be connected to God. One of the soul's needs is going to be growth and development. The body's needs is exercise and meeting all the minerals, vitamins, and energy that it needs. And the mind's need would be like stimulation, processing things, listening to all of the emotions and respecting them and every part of yourself. So I would say, just in short, I would say it's internal harmony. And what's included in that is meeting the needs of the mind, body, and soul. That's the best I could do. And all of these things really center around that. So for example, appreciation within Judaism, that's part of appreciating aspects of your life, is going to help you respect the parts of yourselves, which creates harmony, because harmony needs you to meet their needs. And one of the needs of every part of ourselves is respect, and appreciation contributes to that. So I think that's the most broadest definition. I think that will include it, and that's the best I could do for now.
That covers everything, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So how necessary is pain for humans to feel and experience, just like happiness is, in your opinion?
Every part of ourselves is equally useful. That's what I believe. So shame, guilt, anger, fear, envy, rage, and you name it. Self-doubt, self-disgust, whatever you're thinking, that's bad, that's toxic, that's not good. No, that's a very good part of yourself that needs to be heard and always needs to be heard. And what I think, so I keep losing track. So what was your question? How
necessary is pain to feel as an experience?
Right. So I'm broadening the principle, and then I'm saying pain is is a part of ourself. And every part of ourself, they all are messages, they're communications. So when we're saying how necessary is pain, the question that pain to me is a communication that something needs to change. And I think discomfort is the communication that we should go back to where things were the same. So I think pain and discomfort are always going to be at odds with one another. They will almost always exist at the same time as well. So like pain will be an uncomfortable emotion. Discomfort will try to communicate, let's get rid of pain, because when we get rid of pain, that's going to bring us back to homeostasis, to the default, to how things were. And discomfort is trying to keep us safe. And pain is the part of us that will push us, that will provide both the energy and motivation for us to listen to an emotion's communication. So I don't believe any negative emotion will exist in a vacuum, meaning there's no such thing as pain just existing, pain or a negative emotion, and quote unquote negative emotion. I think that pain will always provide the motivation and the energy for us to listen to whatever the emotion is. So they're always going to go together. The emotion's role is to provide the communication, give the message of what needs to change. And then the pain will give you the motivation and the literal energy force, I believe, to implement and administer that change. So I think that in as much as change is necessary for us, pain is that much more necessary. And I think for anyone who wants to get rid of their pain, I would tell them, why are you trying to shoot the messenger? The pain's the one telling you that there's a problem. It would be the equivalent of a doctor telling you need to work out. And you're like, well, what if I get rid of my doctor? How necessary are doctors? Well, no, the doctor's just the one telling you what the problem is with your body. And he's telling you what you need to do because of it. So pain is your best friend. And yes, it's hard to say that. And it's easy to say it intellectually and much harder for someone as myself and many others and many who've been through much more than I have to say something like that on an emotional level. But that's the work. And that's what building the relationship with yourself looks like. And that's how I help my clients do as well.
And do you feel or do you think that by labeling emotions as good or bad, that humans are kind of creating more difficult experiences because we are, putting everything into a box of this is bad, this is negative, or this is good, this is how it must be? Is that limiting our ability to cope effectively?
Yes, and it's also one of our ways of coping. Because if we have too many negative emotions and you get what I'm saying with that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So it's there's no part of us that's bad. So you're going to say, what happens when we do this? Is that good or bad? You're like, is it good or bad that we're doing something good or bad? We're putting things good or bad? The answer is everything is good. The question is about creating a balance. And again, balance and then the right dose in the right context. So that is a very effective coping strategy because in order for us to not get overwhelmed with all of our emotions and pain, we need to get the right dose of it. So one of the ways of ensuring that we're not overdosing on our emotions and destroying our short-term functionality and perhaps survival is by kind of categorizing that these are the emotions that we need to be careful not to get too much of them. So when we're calling it bad emotions, that's just our way to kind of make sure we're not going to get too overwhelmed by them by putting them in a separate box. And I think that's good. And I think that's a good coping skill. But I think we also need to understand that, as you said, demonizing them and getting confused to think that they're actually the enemy, not that too much of them is bad, but they themselves are bad. That's a mistake and that's a problem. And that will cause you to not have a good relationship with yourself. So although it's a good coping skill, confusing the coping with the intellect over here can create a problem then that prevents you from doing the real deep healing work, meaning you're giving up on the long-term quality of life and healing and happiness for the short-term survival of the coping. So I think it's appropriate at times when you feel overwhelmed, kind of put them in the boxes. I think it's a healthy thing to do. I think it's useful. Then you got to realize the long term that you can't really do that in the long term, and you eventually will need to process and integrate and respect every part of yourself in its right time, in the right dose, in the right context. But in the short term, I think sometimes it could be fine. Just don't get lost in it and to think that it actually is something that is really bad, and that's something that actually is too shamed and too disassociated and deny that it exists, because you can't delete or get rid of any part of you, even if you wanted to, and it wouldn't work well for you because you'd be missing one of your key advisors who's advocating for a specific policy priority of what makes you you.
That's a brilliant way of explaining it. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
When we were just talking about pain, you mentioned that pain is something that you yourself have experienced and you're familiar with. And how did you cope with or process pain? Was it from this intellectual perspective that you're able to rationalize or explain that it's something that has to be thought and felt and experienced? Or was it from a different place?
I'm regretting telling you could ask whatever you want now.
You don't
no
have
worries,
to
no worries.
answer.
I'm just fooling around. No worries. You can ask that. I'll say this. I think I went through different phases of trying to figure out, how do I cope? How do I survive? How do I heal? And right now, this is the stage that I'm at in this process. I could see myself changing and developing more perspectives and new ways of thinking. I'm constantly developing, and it's becoming more refined. I'm becoming more refined. I'm integrating more approaches. So I think that if you ask me in 5 years now and ask me all these same questions, I don't think I would be giving you all the same responses. So one part I think is that I think we all do this. We kind of experiment and we kind of figure out, wait, did this work? Did that work? How much? Let's try something new. That's a part of the thing that people need to understand is that when we are trying to cope and survive and heal and pursue our happiness, it's going to involve a process of experimentation and setbacks and learning what works and what doesn't work. And I think finding what works is much more important than finding what doesn't work, by the way. So I think for me, it's been an evolving process. I would say that in the beginning, I probably tried a very behavioristic approach. And I don't think that worked. I think that had helped me a little bit. It helped me stay somewhat functional for a while. That ultimately failed me. And then I did try several types of trying to do deeper work with myself. And that had different degrees of success. The approach that I'm pushing the most is the approach that has had the most success with myself. And that's the source of my passion for it, for sure, is that this is the approach that has really resonated the most and has had the most clear impact and that's worked for me. And then also, then I see it again, how it's really impacting and helping my clients as well.
Cool. Thank you. So my other question, which I always love to ask my guests, is what 3 texts, so it could be publications or a book, or 3 events have really changed your perspective or changed your kind of trajectory in life? Do you have any of those that you could share?
Sure. I would say, I skipped 12th grade. I went straight to, I studied in Israel by a rabbinic institution for advanced Talmudic studies. And I went straight from 11th grade into that. And that was a big move for me. And that definitely put me on a specific track and was there for 4 years. That definitely took me, I left, 11th grade. I was not in a great place and I was doing well academically, etc. But I was not in the best place. And then when I went to Israel, that definitely was a big shift in my world. And that, I guess I think that the leaders of those institutions were much more supportive to me and, helped meet my emotional needs, and as well as the people inside in these institutions in Torah Moshe, in the Mir. I think they really helped me. I had many mentors in those organizations that I didn't have in my previous institutions. And I think that guidance, the camaraderie, as well as advancing in my own Talmudic analysis, all those skill sets, as well as I was also doing some studying on from Jewish sources of how to define happiness, etc., different perspectives on purpose and meaning. That really made a big impact on me. That's one. I would say number 2, I would say going to a trainer, actually. And that may sound funny, but to be one of the big 3. It could be, it was. I felt that the physical empowerment as well as the relationship with my trainer really kind of put in me the certain energies that gave me the space to do this deeper healing work. And that's kind of what I do for my clients. Again, almost everything I do for my clients was something that I've done for myself. And that was a big move for me. And it really opened things up for me. It created the space that allowed me to do the deeper healing work for myself. I would say a third situation was, I think, is partly from my current psychology doctoral program and really changing the perspective of seeing parts of myself as toxic and as unhealthy and as problematic. And again, as you said in the beginning, the good and bad boxes, and realizing the good and bad boxes is not the right ideology, but it is a good coping skill. Realizing that even the parts that contradict my ideology, the reason why we think in those terms is also good and useful. And realizing how every part of ourselves is trying to communicate to us something, that it's not the problem itself, it's a symptom. It's something that's telling us that there's something else going on. And that paradigm shift for me really shifted my whole relationship with myself and really opened the door for a lifelong process of integrating and bringing to the table, bringing that respect to every part of myself. All that's been so shamed by society, by myself for so long, and so denied that they even exist or repressed or negated, and just gently and kindly bringing them to the surface and to give them the respect they deserve.
Great. So I'll ask you what your third event or text or life-changing thing is, but just going back to the second point in terms of your trainer, did you say your third option? I don't think you did.
The 3 ones that I mentioned was the first one was going to Israel
Yes.
for 12th grade, and that was for 4 years. The second.
So how old would you have been? Sorry.
I was 17.
At that point. So 17, and were you born in America?
I was born and bred in New York, in Nassau County.
Cool. Okay. And so you then went to Israel, and that sounds amazing because of the fact that you were fully aware that everyone around you was way much more in tune with your emotional needs as well.
No, well, not completely. I wouldn't say that they were so aware necessarily, but I think they were meeting them more so than what I was before, and in a much major way, meaning much more invested in my development. Yeah, I would put it like that.
Cool.
Yeah, so number 2 and 3 was number 2 was the trainer, and number 3 was
Yes.
just from my PsyD education, how they helped
Yes.
me. They really help shift. They're more psychodynamically oriented, and that helped me. There's different psychological orientations, modalities, perspectives, and the more psychodynamic approach sees it in this way. And for me, that was a transformation. It was a total paradigm shift, and it really changed the trajectory of my approach to myself, as well as my approach to others, my approach in my coaching, approach to and opened the door to a lifelong journey. So those were the 3 things.
Thank you. So you just cut out halfway through when you moved on to your third one. Thank you for sharing those. Just in your opinion and based on your experience, are religion and spirituality one and the same?
There is a movement to try to separate them, that we like spirituality, but we don't like religion.
Yes, yes.
And I think the reason for that is because religion, I think part of it is political. So if we could all get around and like the fuzzy feelings that spirituality give us and the deep connection and the out-of-body experience, let's let me get around them. We don't talk about things. I think it reaches a broader narrative that we can't talk to each other about things that we disagree with. I'm sure we'll have a lot of disagreements. You come from a Buddhist belief. For me, Buddhism is considered idolatry, and I hope I could say that to you. And
sorry, it's Hindu, but you're right, it is idolatry. Yes, it's the same part of the world. It's all good.
My apologies, but there you go.
That's okay.
And let's see if I'm allowed to make mistakes.
Yes, absolutely.
So that breakdown in conversation, I think, forces us to anything that has controversy. So Christian versus a Jew, different types of Christianity, different types of Judaism, different types of Hindu, Buddhism, etc. We can't talk about it anymore. So therefore, religion gets cut out, and then the only thing left is the only thing that makes us try to skip to the experience. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part is a defense against, because naturally as human beings, the thing that we prize most is our own sense of agency, our sense of free will. And I think that for many, in order to protect themselves against losing that, they don't want to give that power to someone else to dictate for them how to live their lives. They see religion as a coercive, as that it means I have to commit to something and that's going to make demands and control my entire life. And that's restrictive. And in order to protect that sense of freedom, I think they do that. And I think a third aspect of it is that many people, I think the vast majority of us go through tremendous suffering in our lives. And I think that the defense, and I think naturally our brains are wired to say, why God? God. And then what results from that is that we disassociate from God. We say, it's the world, the universe. But then we'll say, why the world? World, why are you doing this to me? Universe, right? Why are the fates doing this to me? And we'll find another entity. We're not going to call it God because that's too painful for us. Meaning we're really so angry, so enraged towards God for the injustice that we're so pure and good. And God, how can you do this to me and create this suffering? I don't understand why. That it reaches a point where we go to negation and denial and disassociation, to disconnect from our own experience, and we point to God and we just call him something else, and we like everything else about it except the relationship itself. And this is, when people go that route, to me, it's the surrender of their relationship with God because they're overwhelmed with the pain and the rage towards him. And then it gets blocked out into denial and gets pushed deep into the unconscious. And we'll just give other labels to religion and religious experience and leading a religiously oriented life. So I don't think the split is really possible. No. I think that we try to do it to help cope, so just to summarize, to cope with the pain and the rage. I think we do it to try to protect our freedom. And I think part of the reason why people stay stuck in that, I think, is a lot of it is because of that we can't even have those types of conversations. And therefore we just gravitate towards what just feels good without the commitment and the demands that stand behind that.
That was a brilliant answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was definitely. I've spent a lot of my earlier life in interfaith dialogue. So having these conversations and questions out there and these discussions is something that I have always really enjoyed. And I think one of the things that people need to understand is that it's okay to be different and value what you love, if that makes sense. Because it's like people kind of hide where they really are from or where they've come from. And like you said, move on to change titles or what they ultimately believe in. But everyone, each to their own.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, that's a great point. I like that point of, just be your authentic self. And I think that our fear, and I think, again, so I'll just show you how I would integrate my approach. I would say the fear of expressing who you are is understandable and legitimate. And I think we should respect that fear because he successfully is protecting you from conflicts that can escalate, that can disrupt the relationships that are meeting many of your needs. So I think we should respect that fear. And I think that's step one, is not to like willpower and overwhelm it and just do this new approach that you heard on this podcast right away. No, first learn to respect and accept that fear of what might happen and see the consequences and integrate him. And now let's listen to another voice too. The voice that wants you to be your natural, authentic self. The part of you that wants you to live in sync and live externally as you do internally by having all your voices to have an appropriate level of representation. And that means bringing them all to the surface, which includes your belief systems, values, etc.
Thank you for that, Benson. One last question. Do you have a question that you would leave out for the listeners to mull over?
Yes.
You don't have to. It's just me putting it out there.
Yes. I would say this. I would say, what part of yourself have you or society convinced you that you need to cut out or get rid of, eliminate or suppress in order for you to move on, to create happiness and be the best you? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it your past? People say, oh, you got to leave your past behind. Let go of your pain. Do you need to let go? Or maybe you need to let it in. Maybe you need to integrate it, let it into yourself. And that's the question I'll say. And I'll say maybe you should be a little suspicious of people who tell you that you need to cut off your arm in order to move on. So I think let's try to think of an approach that maybe every part of you is worth holding on to and is valuable. And maybe there's a way for us to learn to bring ourselves all together and not need to get rid of any part of ourselves, because every part of yourself is useful and helpful. So I think that's a useful question to look over. And if you're looking for help with that, I'm very happy. You could definitely reach out through, the links in this description, etc., or anything, CoachBensonFox.com, if you're looking for help and being able to work together to accomplish that together.
I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Eternal Paradigm. Join me next time.